to shoddy treatment of customers, to a deceitful manipulation of one of the most important interest rates. Everyone now understands that something went very wrong in the UK banking industry, and we need to put it right.
There has never been a time in modern banking when the industry has been so distrusted, some might say reviled. And it was with the Governor of the Bank of England's condemnation still ringing in the city that the Prime Minister today ordered change.
The British people want to see two things. They want to see bankers who acted improperly punished, and they want to know we will learn the broader lessons of what happened in this particular scandal.
That scandal is the Libor affair, named after the interbank lending system whose interest rates were manipulated by Barclays, although RBS also sacked 4 staff last year amid allegations they were up to something similar.
Are you the fall guy?
Today, Barclays chairman Marcus Aegis resigned. Its chief executive, Bob Diamond, did not. He'll appear before the Commons Treasury Select Committee on Wednesday, and today he sent a letter to staff saying many have rightly stated that there are questions we have to answer. Detailed answers will continue to come. That was set this morning ahead of the government announcing an inquiry into the banking sector. All of it.
The manipulation of the most used benchmark interest rate reveals that there is a broader issue of the professional standards and culture in some parts of the financial services industry that was allowed to grow up in the years before the crisis and which still needs to change.
Unlike the Leveson look into media practice, this will not be a public inquiry but a parliamentary one. It will be led not by a judge but by the chairman of the Treasury Select Committee. And that's not good enough, according to Labour.
However able or distinguished, politicians investigating bankers will not command the consent of the British people.
But the Serious Fraud Office is also holding a criminal investigation, so those behind the worst of the industry's scandals may yet end up explaining themselves to a judge after all.
David Marsland there. We're now joined from Westminster by the Liberal Democrat MP John Thurzo, a member of the Commons Treasury Select Committee. In Edinburgh is the investment banker and former chief executive of Noble Group, Ben Thompson. And here in the studio is the business commentator Alf Young. Welcome all to Scotland tonight. Alf, the layman might consider the Libor rate kind of obscure. Why does this matter?
I think the average person out there probably had never heard of it before this week. And the importance of it is that the banks collectively brought daily to a central point, which was the British Bankers Association, the rate at which they were having to borrow from other banks, because banks do borrowing on a daily basis from each other. And they were supposed to be doing this accurately. And then the BBA would take all of these individual rates and take some off the top and some off the bottom and get an average. And once you set that average rate, you then had a rate against which you could benchmark all the other commercial rates for your mortgage, for your loan, and all the other things that banks do. And now that we discover that even before the credit crunch and the crash, and certainly after it as well, you had both traders manipulating those rates for their own benefit, for their own trading book benefit, and then you had whole banks that were worried in the credit crunch that they were going to lose their credibility because they looked as if they were out of line with other banks and maybe facing a liquidity crisis, that they were changing the rate for that purpose. And all of that has suddenly emerged because of this plea bargaining that Barclays has done and taken this great fine from both the American regulators and the British regulators, and now it's banker bashing season phase 2, and politicians going for them with gusto.
We've had one commentator, Ben Thompson, who said investment banking is an organised scam endemic with conflicts of interest. Is that fair? As a former investment banker, is that fair?
I'm not sure. I think scam is probably too far, but I think the culture of investment banking and commercial banking doesn't fit well together. And for the last 20 years, there's been a the culture of investment banking, the risk-taking, the bonuses, has filtered into the commercial banking side. And these two shouldn't really be mixed. And certainly I would endorse what John Kay has been saying, and the Government Bank of England, that it's a mistake to have commercial banks and investment banks together, and that has caused not just this potential problem, but some of the problems since 2007.
John Thurso, there have been calls for the resignation of the chief executive of Barclays. The chairman has gone, but the chief executive, Bob Diamond, is still there. He's appearing before your Treasury Select Committee on Wednesday. What will you be asking him?
Well, there are a range of things that I want to know. Most of all, I want to know how this happened, why there was a failure of compliance. There's two different things here. First of all, pre-crash, traders off their own bat trying to make more money for themselves and the bank. And secondly, post-crash, the bank actually massaging or under-reporting the rate in order to give the view that they were safer than they were. And both of these are symptomatic of a culture of deceit. And it's right at the core of big banks nowadays, and we have to separate them out and get back to something that's more prudential and more akin to what people want on the high street.
Alfie and Ben talking there about separating commercial and investment. This seems to be a regular theme coming up. Is that, you would agree with that?
Well, I think Ben's absolutely right. And I think the problem we have at the moment is that the government has a plan. It invited an independent commission, the Vickers Commission, to look at the way in which banks had come together, both in the popular version of it, the casino bit, and the boring kind of vanilla banking bit came together. And increasingly, as in Barclays' case with Bob Diamond, it's the guys that ran the investment operations who became the people running the whole bank. So the banks became increasingly driven not by the kind of daily boring service they do to you and me as we go into a branch or go online, but they did it to make money for the bank. And that's where the problem is. And the problem with the government's current solution, the coalition's current solution to that, is that they wanted to go some way down the road, but they didn't quite want to go as far as the Vickers Commission wanted to go. And now there are a lot of voices, and I would put my own, and I suspect Ben maybe is in the same camp, would now say that you really need more than Vickers was proposing. You need an actual separation of the two. If they want to play that casino game and lose money, let them do it, but let them do it with their own money and lose it and go bust. But keep the other bit, which affects everyday people and their paychecks and the rest of it. Let's leave that as a boring utility operation that keeps people happy.
John Thurso, you're nodding in agreement.
Absolutely. I was always in favour of a return to Glass-Steagall, a return to complete separation. I have been convinced that the ring fence is a compromise that could be made workable. In the light of what's happened, I am re-evaluating that acceptance, and I've gone back to where I started, which is actually, I think, complete separation. Now, I will wait to see the evidence, but I think, and it was my question today to the Chancellor, that we should be revisiting Vickers to see if a ring fence is adequate, because I'm not at all convinced that it's going to do the job. The two cultures are just so fundamentally different that I believe they now have to be separated.
Ben, from somebody who's worked in banking, is it the system that causes this, for want of a better word, corruption, or is it the people who go into it?
Well, I think that first of all, it's the culture. The culture of investment bank is about risk-taking, and the culture of a commercial bank should be about prudent lending and making sure that your deposits, money taken from the public, is absolutely bulletproof, and it's very safe lending that you have on the other side. And that does not fit well with the culture of risk-taking, which goes together with bonuses, that fits in an investment bank. So splitting them, in my opinion, is the only sensible way to go. The danger will be that people will call for more regulation and more capital. There is no amount of capital, really, that will be enough to cope with a systemic breakdown of the system. And what is the point in having regulation when, at the moment, the operations of the bank are so complicated and the cultures are so different that not even the boards often know what's going on? So how are the regulators then supposed to know what's going on?
Are you confident a parliamentary inquiry will get answers to these questions?
I think they'll come to the same conclusion. I think they'll come to the same conclusion as they did in 1934. It took 5 years after the crash in 1929 for politicians to work out that you needed to separate investment banks from commercial banks. It's about 5 years since we've had the financial crash in 2007. Okay. So perhaps people are waking up that you need to actually have a proper separation.
Very briefly, John Thurso.
I think this inquiry can go quickly. We know a great deal already from previous inquiries. We've got legislation already coming through, and our job on that committee, whoever's on it, will be to get quickly to the facts and make sure that the legislation coming through is fit for purpose. But I think there's a lot of work to do.
Very briefly, Alf, do you anticipate seeing arrests, trials, possibly imprisonment on what's happened already?
I think there are problems about arrests and trials because the kind of thing they were doing with Libor might not be something that they can pin charges on. But I suspect that a lot of people are going to go. I think Bob Diamond will go. I don't think he's going to survive this firestorm. I think a lot of others will go because it's not just a Barclays problem. There's an awful lot of other banks that were playing this game and have still to come into public view as to what they were up to.
Alf Young, John Thurzo, Ben Thompson, thanks very much indeed for joining us in Scotland tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So to come, Scottish football faces crisis decisions on the future.